in the Slack, loving the Twitter, banter. Keep it coming. And with that, my next job is to introduce again our MC, Adam Pennington, to present the state of attack.
Thank you for the scepter. So I'm now switching hats. But I like this hat, so not literally. But to talk a little bit about the current state of the attack. So this is a talk we've done for each ATT&CKcon, going over sort of what's been going on in the framework, what's coming, and to try to give everybody an opportunity to do Q&A as well. So I've asked all my leads to do a who am I slide, so I figure I have to as well. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the lead of MITRE ATT&CK, have been for about 2 years now, since I took over from its founder, Blake Strom. I've been with MITRE quite a long time now, over 13 years. That seems like a long time. My main focuses are on threat intelligence and deception lately. I am a past Defender CTI analyst. I've spent time in the trenches, and I've been involved with attack since it was a spreadsheet with no ampersand. Did used to be ATT&CK before it came out. And if you see underwater photos coming out on ATT&CK's Twitter, stuff like that, it's probably from me. So I figure with a talk called The State of the Attack, I have to start out with saying MITRE ATT&CK remains strong. So my welcome, I talked a little bit about how it's been 2.5 years since we've been here, since the last time Blake delivered this same talk. And so we had already come a long way 2.5 years ago. We had come from this, well, sort of ugly Excel spreadsheet to a bit less ugly Excel spreadsheet. No, but we had expanded a lot. We'd added tactics. We'd gotten up to 266 techniques at the point in time this was done. But there's a little secret about that slide. This is what it really looked like 2.5 years ago before we cropped the bottom of that image. In case you missed it, this big section over here. So persistence and defense evasion especially had gotten kind of unruly. We couldn't fit it. A lot of techniques had gotten sort of uneven. And so the shape of attack has actually changed quite a bit since the last time we were in this room. So this is what attack looks like today. Yes, really. I didn't have to crop or chop off anything. For those of you in the room who have attack flags, you might have noticed it's now shaped a bit more like a banner than a flag. But so it's gotten wider, it's gotten shorter. And so I wanted to talk about some of what's happened since the last time we were coming from this room. So I'm going to get into some of the changes that have actually happened over that time period. Starting with attack for industrial control systems. So we released attack for ICS in January of 2020. Attack for ICS covers behaviors on industrial control systems. We keep it as a separate matrix, so it's off to the side. If you're ever feeling nostalgia for the media wiki that attack used to be, you can currently go to the attack for ICS site. We keep it separate because it's a unique space. We think there are unique adversaries there that are focused on it. And it's kept up with parallel updates in its own site. And so I have some updates to that coming in a little bit too. Sort of the big thing and the reason why that shape changed so much is sub-techniques being added to enterprise. That's encouraging reaction too. But so sub-techniques added a new level to techniques. So it allowed us to describe things that are specific to platforms, to specific operating systems. It allowed us to even out the granularity of the techniques, and it allowed us to fit it into a PowerPoint slide again. We've gotten a lot of feedback in the past 2 years. Actually, reaction in the room is nice to hear too. That most people have been happy with the change, and one way that people have also said that is voting with their feet. So we've seen most people over time switch to newer versions of attack and actually leverage sub-techniques in their products. Thank you. So because sub-techniques have worked out pretty well, something you are going to see over time where you have these separate matrices still, is sub-techniques coming over time to the rest of attack. I'll talk a little bit about mobile, and we'll figure out when exactly on ICS in the future. So I know some of you were fans of pre-attack, and so I'm sorry that it is no longer here with us as of October 27, 2020. But we did replace pre-attack with two new tactics to take its place in the framework. So reconnaissance and resource development. So this let us talk about, in the main enterprise framework, things that the adversary is doing to try to get information to be able to do a breach, or the steps that they take in order to actually build up their activity. So writing the malware, setting up websites, etc. And again, this is an area where we're slowly seeing more and more people adopt it into their practices and show up in more and more reporting. We know this is a tough space for some people. This isn't necessarily intelligence that every defender has, but we think it can be a useful place for a lot of people to look at threats. A platform that I think a lot of people may not have caught being released was our network devices platform. So October 2020, we released the network devices platform covering network infrastructure devices. This is things like routers and switches. The adversary is actually hacking into these types of devices, replacing their firmware. And this is added into enterprise attack. So I finally decided to stop abusing Ryan Kovar's sad cloud graphic, because we're very much in happy cloud mode now. But so Ryan spoke at the first ATT&CKcon. He talked about our lack of cloud coverage. And so over time, we've released cloud. We've covered a number of platforms in it. And we've done work over this time period expanding the space that we're in. So in the space of platforms, we added Google Workspace alongside Office 365. And we made a shift to actually get rid of 3 platforms as well. So you may have noticed that we got rid of AWS, GCP, and Azure as platforms in attack and replaced them with infrastructure as a service, IaaS. The reason we did this is that we took a look at what was unique between those platforms. And so what were we adding differently as techniques between them? And the answer was nothing. Attack actually was showing at the level of granularity that attack is at, about the same techniques in each of the platforms. The other thing is there are a lot of other IaaS platforms out there besides those 3. So this condensing those let us describe more space. We also released attack for containers. So we had a lot of demand looking at things like Kubernetes and other container orchestration platforms. And so we were finally able to build up enough intelligence in the space on what people were really seeing from threat actors. More recently, over the past year, we've been making some changes to enterprise data sources. So before, data sources in attack for enterprise were just a list of text strings. So these weren't that consistent. I have to admit it. So we would have something like file monitoring, something you do, process command line parameters, something that you're gathering, and Windows registry, something that you're gathering information on. There's also no details beyond the name. So we were just sort of describing things that you could gather, but there's no information on what we really meant by that. We sort of hoped that you'd interpret it correctly, and no descriptions behind them. So we've done 2 releases last year to improve this. Our first release in attack version 9 that came out in April 2021, we started adding a little bit of structure to our data sources. And so this idea of data sources and data components. Data source being the thing that you're gathering the information on, and the component being the specific activity that you're gathering information about. Now, originally, when we released this in version 9, if you clicked on these data sources, you actually went to a GitHub site, you're looking at a YAML file. That's not really ideal. That's not how we normally build things in attack. We do things in sticks here. So we fixed that in October. In October 2021, we released our current version of enterprise data sources, where data sources are now an object. There's a data sources tab at the top of the tech website. You can go into them. You can see what techniques that a particular data source is relevant to. And we're seeing a number of sort of our power users taking advantage of this and looking at, what sorts of techniques you can gather with specific information. And like I said, since it's us, it's of course in Sticks 2. Sticks 2. But it, because anything that's actually on the attack website, other than things like documents and lists of conferences, is generated from our Sticks repository. It's not the other way around. And so these objects are out there. You can actually use them, do processing, take a look at what's inside each of these data sources. Something that hasn't changed in the last 2 years is attack's community. So attack, and again, with an A, Blake's original preferred spelling, was originally built primarily using adversary data that MITRE gathered doing deception ops against APT actors. And so if you think back to 2013, there really wasn't much threat intelligence reporting available out there. There wasn't a lot of talk about adversary behaviors. You had some people publishing IOCs, but there wasn't much for us to work from in terms of reporting. So we had to use some of our own. Since then, since attack was released to the public in 2015, it's the community that's kept us going though ever since. So it's the contributions that we have coming in from, well, you, that are letting us actually understand what adversaries are doing, what sorts of groups we should be focusing in on, and what pieces of software we should be adding to attack. And so this is a slide that has actually been used in a couple of these talks now. It's getting a touch unreadable. So, and here's why. We now have 308 organizations and individuals who are named contributors to attack. Now, that's not everyone. So some people ask us not to credit their contributions. They don't want to put their name out there. They may have rules around what they can brand as their own. And it's been growing too. So in 2019, the last year we had ATT&CKcon, we had 82 named contributors. 2020, we had 130. And in 2021, we had 155. And 155 is a lot of you. And you think of what we're processing. We're trying to do a better job on getting down the amount of time that it takes to process contributions, get back to you, and apologize where it does take a long time. But we are getting a lot of new information and a lot of new contributors into the framework. One more stat, as we're continuing to grow the slide and add contributors, we're also down to 4.5 font to make this work. Sorry, Katie. So that's the past. What about the future? So first of all, attack for mobile. I hinted at this earlier that we've done stuff with sub-techniques in enterprise. People seem to like it. And we've got some of the same problems, maybe not won't fit on a PowerPoint slide, but the unevenness that's happening in the parts of attack we haven't gone there yet. So we're about to release a sub-technique beta for attack for mobile. So this will be coming in attack's April release, version 11. And so the attack for mobile team has actually spent all of this past year working on this internally. So implementing sub-techniques, moving their information over to it. And we think those of you that are interested in the iOS and Android security space are going to find this useful. So the final release, similar to how we did sub-techniques and attack for enterprise, we're planning on changing the beta into the final release sometime this summer, depending on what sorts of feedback we get and how much we have to change from the beta. We're going to be continuing this trend too of taking features that we first released in enterprise and bringing those to other parts of attack. So data sources are coming up in the same sorts of forms as you find in attack for enterprise, in mobile as well. So I've stolen most of my thunder on talking about the future. And I'm going to be having my leads over the next 2 days give updates on a lot of their areas. So I'm going to give a preview, hopefully get you back to their individual talks. But there's much more to come on each of these areas. The first is defensive attack coming up just at 1:30 today. Lex Crupton from the side, going to be talking about some of the work that we're doing now, moving from data sources to refactoring detections. So if you followed the changes we've made over the past couple of years, there's been this trend to take blobs of text and turn them into more structured data. So mitigations, data sources, and now detections. And we're also going to be tying those to individual data sources and components. So if you have a detection, what is it you need to gather to do that one detection? In the past, you sort of had to guess what the mapping is between the blob of detection we write, the data sources we list, and we're going to be making that some more explicit. Lex is also going to be talking about some upcoming changes to CAR. So something I know a lot of you are a fan of, but we do have some plans in store for CAR in the future as well. This afternoon, our threat intelligence lead, Matt Malone, is going to be talking about campaigns. So as a threat intelligence person, I'm actually really excited about this update. We're going to be doing some restructuring to groups in attack. So today, when we have a group in attack, we have these associated group descriptions. We have basically all of the reporting that people have tied back to this one group over time in their reporting. So like APT&CK, we've tied together things like Nobelium, Yttrium, the Cozy Bear, the Dukes, all together into one piece. Well, we actually did a lot of work doing separate tracking for the events around SolarWinds last year. So we had built up this data, and then when US government came out and said, it's APT&CK, we pulled it together, we sort of lost that distinction. And so we'd like to get that distinction back. We also have a problem in attack where we today only will do reporting on named groups. So somebody's got a great threat report they've put out, describes tons of adversary behavior, gets to the end, and they don't name it. And they don't tie it to any other report. Today we wouldn't add it to attack. So we only add groups that people have actually put a name to, have called it a group into attack, because we're not the ones sort of creating the space. With campaigns, we'll be doing things that just have identifiers and allow us to add some of these reports. Trying to not to hit the laser button while I'm pointing the pointer at everybody. Tomorrow morning, Otis Alexander is going to be talking about attack for industrial control systems. So something I'm really excited about. And some of you may be sad if you really love the media wiki, is that attack for ICS is moving into attack.mitre.org. So it's going to join the website along with attack for enterprise, along with attack for mobile, and sort of be full-fledged member of the team. So we've already been releasing it in sticks for a couple of releases now, but it's all going to be coming together. They're also doing work to expand assets and how they talk about different types of devices that are specific to the industrial control space, and keeping up with this theme of mobile and ICS moving towards parity with enterprise, adding detections to ICS. It's been a space that's taken a little while. Not necessarily as much gets published on how you defend against specific actions in the ICS space, but we think that we now are at a point where we can actually talk about it intelligently. Mac and Linux attack. So we released attack for Mac and Linux way back in 2017. And it was the work of Cody Thomas primarily. He did a lot of good work in the space, but it really didn't get a lot of love after that. So we don't see a ton of contributions in that space. And so our eyes tend not to go places we have some exceptions. It tend to go to that space unless we're seeing stuff coming in. So we wanted to go back and actually put some specific attention into it. And so Kat Self, who's also going to be coming to you from the ATT&CKcon couch, is focused in on updating our Mac and Linux techniques, going through the entire framework. We've done a lot of work with Mac already. We're just starting it on Linux, and she'll be talking about more details for our just before lunch talk tomorrow. Finally, Jared Ondrachek, our development lead, is going to be talking tomorrow afternoon. So a lot of people are familiar with ATT&CK, have seen the stuff we've put out in terms of our sticks and our actual website, but not necessarily all of you have seen some of the code we've put out. So for quite a long time now, we've been releasing open source programs, whether it's our website, ATT&CK Navigator, whether it's for manipulating layer files in ATT&CK Navigator. We put out there GitHub. And so Jared's going to get into some of those resources that you can put to use. But there's one more thing. So we haven't yet announced when the next release of ATT&CK is. And so we decided to put it on the best date. So the next ATT&CK release will be April 25th. And so that just coming next month. It's a Monday, which is a little bit unusual for us, but we will try to make that work. So we've intentionally left decent amount of time for questions because we thought you might have some for me. So with that, I'm gonna, since this is our first talk with Q&A, Jamie's gonna be leading our Q&A through the rest of the conference. So we don't have an audience mic. If somebody is asking a question, he'll be repeating it to make sure that people in the audience have, and he's also watching our Slack for any questions that come in from there.
First off, thank you. And while folks, take your last sip of coffee and get those questions geared up, we did have some amazing comments in Slack. First off, the question from Barry Anderson: what do you think about the prospect of sub-contributors?
Sub-contributors?
Yeah. I feel like we're getting to that point. I think you said 4.5 font. That's a little hard to track.
Oh, yeah. So to condense it, yeah, I think we're probably going to have to retire that slide after this, or I'm just going to show a blurry image with lines and not even bother to fill in the real data. But.
So like Adam said, we have about 8 minutes or so before we go to break. But at this point, we really do want to hear from you. This is one of those opportunities. We did an AMA during the pandemic. It was a great time for us. We had a blast. Any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Feel free to just throw a hand up or stand up. Oh, question over here. And for our friends on the live stream, the question was, is there any plans to go in more depth regarding data sources and components, particularly mapping those to particular logs, particular events, especially as we begin to unpack the nuances of different types of platforms, the differences between Windows logging and macOS logging?
Actually, Jamie, I might kick that one back to you.
Perfect. Yes, that is something we are really excited about in terms of building out the data source objects. Is we went with this mentality of if you build it, they will come. Really giving folks a chance and opportunity and space to deliver those contributions. So you might have noticed now, even with ATT&CK version 10, we have data sources, we have data components, and in those data component definitions, we did begin to start list examples of, this is, sometimes known as Sysmon event 1 or a 4688. We really do want to hear from you in terms of, how are you folks actually, detecting these adversary behaviors? Are there particular logs, or particular events that have really helped you? Because Lex is going to present this later today, and Adam kind of teased it, but for version 11, we will be merging those detections and data components together. So the more rich and nuanced we can really get in depth there, the more, the better. Because one of the big things about ATT&CK is we're not just documenting the adversary perspective. We really are trying to connect that back to the defensive countermeasures and really make it impactful for you. So great question. Thank you. Over here.
I'm not so synchronous, but I do see Navigator that have overturned.
So for the question for the live audience is, what is the status of Navigator, and what's the future look like for that tool?
Yeah, so Tech Navigator is under active development. We actually, Jared will be talking about some work that's been done on it lately. There are a number of improvements that we're hoping to see in terms of its ability to display data, work with it. And so some people are using it and have been using it as an alternate way to view attack over time. But there are no plans to really diverge from where we are now, where we've got attack.mitre.org, which has all of the information behind it, and Attack Navigator, which is a way to deal with focus on sort of picking techniques. So which techniques are going for a particular group or problem or defense without sort of the full data behind them.
We had one second. We had a great question from online, or I think Tim might be in the room. So I think it's your birthday as well. So either happy birthday or happy belated. So a lot of folks, amazing. A lot of folks, might have actually, as you said, just noticed the network platform. How would you describe the scope of what that platform is trying to capture?
Right now, it's pretty specifically routers and switches. So we have left it open as the possibility of getting broader. So that's not a scoping decision that we wanted to keep it to that. That's where we had enough data to talk about it. And if you look through the contributions, it was heavily from Cisco. We had a ton of contributions from there, but as well as a number of other sources. And so we really appreciated some of the publishing that happened around that, where there is a bit more information now on threats that have actually happened in the past, stuff that we're able to cite as references. And so we felt that we'd reached the threshold to be able to talk about that space. But in order to be able to sort of broaden it, we would need to see more publication out there. So the two things that we look for to publish a technique and attack are that there is a publicly citable description of the technique. So that could be anything from, somebody tweeted and said, an adversary did this, or I could do this, or a black hat talk, or an ATT&CKcon talk, talking about something that could be done or has been done. And then we're looking for that proof that it's been done by somebody in the wild. That might be somebody whispering in our ear. That might be a public threat intelligence report. And so, no, not necessarily something we cite. It does need to be, of course, unclass. But so it's finding that threshold in different spaces can sometimes be challenging, and that's definitely been one of them.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I think there was one. Yes.
Yeah, Ivan.
Yeah. So now that we have a building of data components with the data sources, and now detection, but also here, by the way, that it's built out in its own way. I'm wondering in the future, would there be any interest in possibly creating objects for investigations that are like follow-up investigations around the data components?
So for the audience online, the question, very nuanced and very awesome question, was now that we're starting to kind of really dive into the detection side of attack and we're building out these data sources and data components, how far are we interested in going in terms of investigations and other categories beyond just the detection engineering perspective? And I can.
Yes, it's an interesting question. So I don't think we've thought too hard down that path. I mean, we obviously have gone down into some things like specific implementations of detections and things like cyber analytics repository, but sort of going down that path of pulling it together into investigations. I don't know if we'd go there. So there is a line where we're trying to keep stuff general enough to be able to work for basically all defenders. But it's certainly an interesting proposal. Jamie, I didn't know if you wanted to add to that.
I think it ties back to the if we build it, they will come. That's something where, like Adam said, we try to not be prescriptive and say this is the best way you're going to do cyber. This is the best approach for you, rather than kind of connect you to those ideas. So I think it might be something where maybe we can prototype it, maybe we can collaborate and see start with a spreadsheet and build it and see what it looks like. And then if it makes sense for a broad community, definitely something we may be interested in pursuing. So I think you said, exactly to the heart of your question, the detection and defensive side is much more than just alerts and monitoring. So really, really thank you. I think we have one time for the final question. Yes. Oh, for the live audience, the question was, have we thought about characterizing supply chain and infections, and really that kind of diving in a really deep dive into that space?
So we do have techniques for each of those in attack today. So we do have a supply chain technique. We do go into each of those areas a bit. We've gotten the proposal of doing like an entire supply chain framework to just expanding out that area. Right now, inside enterprise attack, it is sort of in line with how we cover the rest of techniques. So just doing a huge bulk up there would be a little out of place. But there is the possibility to improve those techniques, expand it in place, possibly sub techniques, and so a lot of that's going to be driven by what we see for contributions. So
the inbox.
Yeah, if you have suggestions on specifics to add, so we're.
With that, I think we came right in our time for break. So thank you for the indulging us. And for those on the live stream, and those in the room as well, we will be sending over to Kat on the ATT&CKcon couch. So stay tuned and see you in about 30 minutes.